Welcome back in. Opponents to legalization in Maryland are worried about health effects, particularly on young people, and how the industry develops, sometimes to the detriment of minority communities. Joining me to talk about it is Will Jones. He's the Director of Community Engagement and Outreach for SAM, which stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Will, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Katie. Glad to be here.
So we talk a lot about the law on this show. We get into the legal weeds and the nerdy part of it, but we also talk about the human stories behind the law, lawmaking, and policy choices. And you have a real on-the-ground view of how marijuana affects our local community. You're a firefighter in Washington, D.C. You have that human experience and stories. So how did you even get into this position in your work with SAM?
Yeah, so for me, like you said, I work for the fire department in D.C. and just throw out there, I don't represent the fire department at all, but it gives me a perspective of how our laws and how our, especially our drug laws, how they impact people. And the approach that we take at Smart Approaches to Marijuana is we really want to take a public health approach to the issue. When I started working on the issue where I lived in D.C., the closest store to my house in any direction was a liquor store. And I tell people you can go a little bit farther and maybe get to a convenience store, and next to that you'd see it covered with advertisements for alcohol, tobacco. And I see, again, just from work as a first responder, I also see the impact that not just illegal drugs, but that our legal drugs have on people and on society, and the public health costs that has. And so when I heard regulate marijuana like alcohol in D.C. and other states looking into that, I was actually somewhat concerned, because what we've done with alcohol I don't think is the greatest. And especially when we look at the impact in disadvantaged communities and minority communities, where here in Maryland, Baltimore, there's 8 times as many liquor stores in minority communities as other places. We really believe that we can move forward with marijuana policy in a better way than recreating what we've done and allowed with the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry.
Your words actually echo what Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders said recently at an event. He's been going to visit a lot of young people at schools, and he said it worries him how often legalization comes up, that he's in favor of legalization, but he also worries about how focused they are on it and some of the impacts that it has on our communities. He said he's no fan of alcohol and drug use and its impact on our community, but still a favor of legalization. So let's talk about Maryland. It's coming up on the ballot. They're looking at legalization. It seems likely. You echoed some of the concerns here, but how can you find that kind of reasonable in-the-middle approach that you were talking about?
Yeah, 100%. So we definitely need to move forward with our marijuana laws past punitive policies where people are getting arrest records, or even worse, getting incarcerated for using a substance, right? It should be treated as a health thing as most, not as a criminal justice issue. The Biden administration, I think, just gave a great example of productive ways where we can have targeted reforms. So whether that's expungements, whether that's resentencing, or also decriminalization, those are policies that we can look at that are focused on the issue of the wrongs in the criminalization that we've had for marijuana in the past. However, creating a multi-billion-dollar industry, there's an article in the Washington Post that said it would bring in more than the NFL if it's legalized at the federal level. That has some concerns, because these industries literally profit off of addiction. When we look at the alcohol industry, 75% of their revenue comes from people that drink on average 10 drinks a day. Most people don't know that, but that's where most of their money comes from. Same thing with the tobacco industry. We see an outsized negative public health impact from people that smoke a lot, and we see 300,000 to 400,000 deaths per year from smoking-related illnesses. And so when we talk about the idea of bringing in an industry, I think we move past righting wrongs, which I think Maryland could do that through decriminalization, expungements, resentencing, things like that are productive. But when we bring in legalization, that's introducing an industry that has a massive advertising budget. Their number one goal is to get as many people using as much as possible, and that has a negative public health impact. And we've seen that in states that have legalized, like Colorado, Washington State, California, seeing increased use of youth rates, driving under the influence, and things like that.
I will say a part of Maryland's question for if it is legalized does include that criminal justice component in part, where there will be an opportunity for expungement after a certain period of time. And if you are currently convicted for possession of the amount that then is legalized, if it goes through, you'll have the opportunity to ask for resentencing. But it sounds like there's more to do. And it sounds like also that it is going to move forward in Maryland. So what is the next step for SAM on educating the public, talking about that criminal justice component, making sure that people understand the repercussions if it goes forward?
So it's exactly really painting the picture of what happens when we allow an industry that profits off addiction, which is what the marijuana industry does. When we allow that, what's the impact that that's going to have in our communities? And so whether it's legalized or not in Maryland moving forward, we want people to be aware. We want people to be aware in their communities of steps that they can take. If, for example, if you don't want to have a dispensary on every other corner in your community. In Colorado, there's more pot shops than Starbucks and McDonald's combined.
That is something in Colorado. Interesting to see if that'll happen in Maryland.
Exactly. So those are the things, productive things that we think, for people should have a say in the input of how this plays out in their community and how it impacts, people they love.
Well, Will Jones, thank you for sharing the work that you do with SAM. Also, thank you for your work in D.C. with the fire department as well. And thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. We'd like to have you back after Maryland votes. We'll see which way it goes.
All right. Thanks, Katie.
All right.